We ended up publishing a whole issue of Skeptic magazine on this subject. This was our cover of this one. It's one of our better selling ones. Controversial covers do well for magazines. And that put me on the map with the deniers as somebody who is a potential enemy, but only potential. They still held out hope that as a fellow skeptic, see, they're skeptical of the Holocaust, and I'm Mr. Skeptic, so maybe I could be skeptical of the Holocaust too. Well, it turns out skepticism is not a position you take ahead of time. It's just an approach to claims, a way to ask questions about claims and test them to see if they're true or not. You might be skeptical of a claim. You might be skeptical of the skeptics of the claim. And that's, of course, what it turned out to be for me. I'm not Jewish. I have no relatives. I don't know anybody personally that was, or of my family that was involved in the Holocaust. So I had no stake in the issue ahead of time, which bothers them to no end, because how else could I be, why else would I be debunking them? So they have gone to great lengths to find a Jewish heritage in my family. They have yet to turn anything up. I've even looked just in case. You know, like, who was it, Janet Reno? Somebody turns out to have some heritage. Well, I don't. They tried, you know, Shermer, maybe it's Shoima, you know, maybe there's something there. They've really looked at. Then they turned to my wife, you know, well, she must be Jewish. That's why he's doing this. Well, she's blonde hair, blue-eyed, she's German, you know, anything but Jewish. And so, okay, can't be. Oh, I know what it is. So their latest theory that they're throwing around the last couple of weeks is that I am a pawn of Zionism, that what Jews do when they can't get something done themselves is it's not hire it done exactly, you manipulate Gentiles to do the job for you. So unbeknownst to me, Alex here has been manipulating me for all these years. I never even knew. And that people like Stephen J. Gould on my board and my good friend Jared Diamond, who turns out to be Jewish, I didn't even know until the deniers found out for me. They tracked this down. Did you know your best friend Jared Diamond is Jewish? It's like, no, I didn't. And to them, the whole world is you're either Jewish or you're not Jewish. This is how they divide the world. So they are baffled as to why I've taken the position that I have, and I keep telling them the reason is because you're wrong. That's it. It's really simple. If you were right, okay, then I'd be on your side. But you're wrong. So that's all there is to it. I think one of the reasons for doing this for us, in terms of why we debunk them instead of somebody else, we're busy investigating lots of claims. Why these guys? Well, it's not really like the flat earthers or some minuscule obscure group. Even though the number of Holocaust so-called revisionists is not that great. At their annual conferences, I just went to one a couple weeks ago. There was maybe 230 people there. Not that many. It's not huge. It's not hundreds of thousands. It's maybe, I don't know, 10,000 worldwide, something like this. It's not huge. But it's the trickle-down effect of what they say that gets into other people's minds. So I will often hear, particularly since this book came out, people say, look, I know these guys are wackos and nuts and that they're wrong, but is it possible that, maybe 6 million didn't die? Maybe there has been some exaggeration. It seems like we do see a lot of attention given to the Holocaust in America when we don't get attention to other things. Is it possible that maybe the story's been exaggerated? I know, those guys are wrong. I'm not one of those. I'm just asking, is it possible? Maybe people actually weren't gassed. Maybe those gas chambers were just used for delousing clothing. Maybe that was exaggerated. So I could see that the efforts by the deniers has trickle down into, and these are just sort of regular folks I run into, that they don't have any agenda. They're just wondering. They heard this somewhere. And so that's why it's important, I think, that we actually line up our ducks and just knock them down one by one. Let's look at the claim and see if it's true or not. And so that really gets to what we're doing here, which is treating history as a science. I am a historian of science, but I'm a social scientist, and we have training in how to test claims, how to test a hypothesis to find out if it's true or not. There's methodologies to do this, and all the historical sciences do this. Cosmologists do it. They're studying the history of the universe. Geologists do it. They study the history of the earth. Paleontologists study the history of life. Archaeologists study the prehistory of human culture, and historians study the history of post-prehistory culture, whatever the right term for that is. I guess that's sort of an oxymoron. But the point is there's ways to test whether a claim is true or not. And the so-called revisionists, they make three major challenges to the story. that 6 million Jews were not killed. It was more like 500,000, 1 million, maybe even 2, depends on which one you talk to and when you talk to them. David Irving has said anywhere from 500,000, and then I hear him sometimes say 1 or 2 million. And that the rest are exaggerations and mistakes and errors and rounding errors, this sort of thing. The second point is that gas chambers and crematoria were never used as a mechanism of mass homicide. All gas chambers were used for delousing clothing. All camps had them, and that's what they were used for. And so there's no way to know if the gas chamber was actually used to kill people. So let's just assume that they were used for delousing clothing. And the crematoria, of course, were used to dispose of bodies that died of so-called natural causes, disease, starvation, and the byproducts of war, which nobody, even these guys, deny that the war was hard on Jews and lots of other people. And so, therefore, the third point is that if 6 million didn't die, and it was far fewer, and gas chambers and crematoria were not mechanisms of mass murder, therefore, 3, there was no intention on the part of the Nazi regime to exterminate European Jewry. Yes, it's true, the Nazis didn't like Jews. Nobody denies that. They were anti-Semitic, rabidly anti-Semitic. Okay, fine, we'll give you that. But hey, who wasn't, is their argument. You know, lots of people were. All they wanted to do was get rid of them, deport them out of the Reich, and that there was never any intention to really do any serious harm. Yes, okay, some of them died, but look, this is war. Bad things happen in war. Look what Americans did to Japanese Americans. They put them in prison camps in California, no less. And look what the Americans did to the Native Americans in the 19th century. And you know, governments just do bad things. And what the Nazi government did, yes, it was kind of bad, but no worse really than what the, say, Allies did when they bombed Dresden and Hamburg, and what Stalin did to his people, and so on. In other words, there's a moral equivalency argument there, that there's no intention, that it was unintentional byproduct of war, and everybody does that. So the Nazis, while perhaps not upstanding citizens, certainly were no worse than any other government agency. So let's look at these claims one by one. How do we know 6 million died? Well, we know by this convergence of evidence argument, specifically within population demographics. So it's a huge subject. I never knew how complex it is, but basically you have to take population counts pre-war of all these different you know, states and counties and cities and towns and districts and so on, and you have to start coordinating them and adding them all up, and then you measure how many were there after the war, and then you look at transports and immigrations and emigrations and natural deaths and unnatural deaths and so on, and you add them all up for each little area, and then you just start building there and there and there and so on. And there's sort of a triangulation effect where you look at different measures of populations. You can use church rolls, you can use births and deaths and things like this, and it starts to all add up. Now, the reason I'm reasonably confident that the figure is close to this 6 million figure is that the numbers are never consistently the same, and that the different people that are doing the counting never come up with the same number. That tells me they probably are on the right track. If the numbers were all coming up the same, I'd be suspicious. There's somebody's cooking the numbers, because in reality, the way science really works is it's a messy, sloppy process, and raw data is always kind of, you know, messy. And these guys fight amongst themselves. You know, is it 5.1? Is it 5.6? Is it 5.9? 6.1? 6.4 million? And the fact that their debates are heated tells me that we have an error range there, an error bar around our figure of 6 million. It's going to be a little bit lower, maybe a little bit higher, and I'm therefore reasonably confident because of that convergence and the fact that all data is going to have a range of error variance in it, that the numbers aren't cooked. They're not exaggerated by any conspiratorial plot, which is difficult to pull off in any case. The second point there is on the gas chambers and crematoria. And so what I'm going to do here is look at a few slides. Now, the question is, how do we know that a gas chamber is used for killing people versus delousing clothing? They didn't put signs on them, you know, saying, here we'll kill people, and this one's for lice. They didn't do that, obviously. So if we use Mauthausen as a model, the camp Mauthausen in Austria was not one of the extermination camps, but we are fairly confident, did at least experimentally gas some people there. And here's how we know. This is at the front of the camp. This is a shower room. You enter the shower room after you've taken off your clothes, and these are real showers that actually work. Near there is the disinfection chambers for the clothing, right next to it. You go through this room, and the next room has several doors like this, in which there are these little chambers. This is a clothing chamber. It's not very big. You couldn't even fit a person inside there, but there's two little racks, and you stick clothing in there, and you turn on the gas, and it delouses them. By contrast, in the back of the camp, completely different building, hundreds of meters in the back, is a whole different building structure, a different architecture entirely. Here, there's a gas chamber. Now, this sign was not there during the war, right? Again, the Nazis aren't stupid. They're not putting signs on their gas chamber. We have to infer what they're doing through the evidence. So here, for example, are these heating tubes. Here is the exhaust fan and vent to take the gas out, fake shower heads. So the room, it's smaller. It looks different than a shower room. It looks different than a delousing chamber. And why do you have to have heating coils in there? And by the way, you can see the same thing in some of the offices. The offices throughout all these camps around Poland, they had these heating tubes, very cold in the winter there, so you run hot water through there, heats them. The reason you have to do that is because Zyklon B gas is embedded in diatomaceous earth and then chopped up into little chunks. In order for the gas to get out of the diatomaceous earth, the clay, it has to be a certain temperature, which is 80 degrees Fahrenheit. So you got to get the room warm enough. Now, if there's enough bodies in there long enough, it will naturally happen. If you want to speed it up, you put heating tubes in there. If this was just a shower, do you really think they're going to treat prisoners of war by warming up the room and making it comfortable for them? Okay, so and we continue right next to the gas chamber. By the way, here's the gas chamber door with a little peephole and the locking device. Now, one of the things David Cole, one of the deniers, pointed out to me early on is that the gas chamber door at the gas chamber in Mauthausen doesn't lock. Made a big deal about this. Clearly, it's a fake and so on. So we went to see it. And sure enough, the door doesn't lock. Well, what's the story with this? And Alex and I, for the longest time, tried to find out what's the deal with this door. It turns out this door was not the original door that was on that gas chamber during the war. The original door was taken off, and it's in some museum in Europe, and this they just put on as part of the museum exhibit. And it took us a long time to find that out. But that's the kind of thing that these deniers used, little minutia, just little tiny little points. Okay, Dr. Shermer, how do you explain that the door on the gas chamber at Mauthausen doesn't lock? Aha! You see, it didn't actually happen. Right. But then you track it down and you go, oh, okay, so that's the answer. And there's hundreds of things like that we outline in the book. Right next to the gas chamber, and by the way, there's the peephole. Oh, they make another big deal about the glass on the peephole of some of the gas chamber doors. Either doesn't have a metal grid over it or there's no glass there. Well, okay, these things are old. The glass may be broken. If there's no metal grid over the peephole, so what? The glass is like a 1/4 inch thick. You know, it's not like you're going to break it with your finger when you're in there. And the room's not under pressure anyway, so even if you broke it, it's not like the gas is all going to escape. But that's the typical argument, minutia type argument they would use. So right next to the gas chamber is the autopsy room here. You can see this table is a replica of this table in this museum. I just saw it a little bit ago. And then there's the morgue where they stack the dead bodies. And then right next to all that is the crematorium. So completely different architecture than the building at the front. Clearly has a different usage than the building at the back. And right next to that, of course, is the chimney. If we move to Majdanek, Alex and I went to Majdanek. We've reconstructed here from the original blueprints. There's two bath and disinfection buildings here. This is the one that has a shower room, and then in the back there's these gas chambers. So again, the architecture is different. If you initially walk in, here's the bath and disinfection building 1. That's the one you go into that we can actually see the gas chambers with the Zyklon B staining. So Alex and I went in there. So initially there's a shower room. Now, there's a shower room and then a large disinfection room. We think this disinfection room was used for delousing clothing. There's a ventilator vent there with a window next to it. That's a historical window. It wasn't added later, I know, because there's Zyklon B right on the wood frame in which the glass is embedded. So we talked to the archivist there and the head guy, Michael Tregenza, and he said, oh yeah, they got the early guys, the Poles who were running this thing, got the story wrong. The homicidal gas chamber is in the back. Obviously, they didn't use this big old window in it. And the other thing we discovered is the only thing worse than Nazi historiography is communist Soviet historiography. And these camps are all liberated by the communists, by the Soviets. So they got there first, and they've been run by these guys are even worse than the Nazis. So we're reconstructing it now that the Cold War is over. And in the bath and disinfection building 2, next to the one we're just looking at, here's an actual disinfection chamber. You put clothing in it, and there's a little rack and so on. Quite different, small, you barely fit a single person in there. Quite different from the rooms in the back, which are actually homicidal gas chambers. There's a reconstruction of this door, by the way, in this museum. The door locks, and it definitely locks, tested that. There's an actual gas detector. There's a peephole with a metal grid over it. And inside, inside the room is this floor-to-ceiling Zyklon B staining, just richly blue. And there's a vent where the gas was put in. And so you see there, just a Maidanek, Mauthausen and Maidanek, quite different architectural structures and designs for 2 different purposes. That's how we know. We're converging. We're looking at the science of it. Of course, Auschwitz, Alex and I went there. We have, the separation of prisoners. I'll kind of go through this quickly. Here in the back, I just want to show you this. This is the unloading platform here. Remember these 2. This is Crema 2 and Crema 3, Crematoria 2 and 3. There was 4 of them in Auschwitz-Birkenau. There's 1 at Auschwitz 1, the main camp, but this was the big camp, Birkenau. So remember those 2. We're going to see aerial photographs of that in just a minute. We actually have, again, convergence of evidence. We have aerial photographs, ground photographs, architectural designs and redesigns. We have eyewitness accounts from guards, from prisoners, from the commandant himself, from the doctors, and they all tell the same story. Not exactly the same story. If it was exactly the same story, I'd be suspicious that somebody was cooking it. But they're never quite the same. And the reason is because things never happen just the same, right? I mean, whether it took 20 minutes for the people to die or 30 minutes or 15 minutes, depends on the temperature, the number of people in there, how much gas they put in. If they all had the exact same number, I'd think, okay, this story was being copied through diffusion. But the fact that they're never the same, and they sometimes disagree with each other, tells me, because that's how things actually work in history. It's much sloppier. So the architect, and this from, Robert Jan van Pelt was kind enough to give us his architectural blueprints, copies of them that he had, and his own reconstruction. So this is Crematoria 2. There's the model of it here in the camp. They entered here. This is the undressing room. They went through here. This is the gas chamber. You'll see holes in the roof of the subterranean gas chamber. It stands about 3 feet off the ground. And then the 5 retorts in which they cremated the bodies, and then the gas chamber, the smokestack there. So here is, we actually went there, we took photographs. Here is, the Nazis dynamited this whole thing. So when the deniers say things like, you go there and there's no holes in the Crematoria 2 roof. There's no holes in the roof. Well, first of all, it's just mostly rubble. And at the last conference, they were wearing T-shirts. You could get this T-shirt that says, "No holes, no Holocaust." This is their new little catchphrase. Everybody has a little slogan. That's theirs. No holes, no Holocaust. What they mean is no holes in Crematoria 2, gas chamber roof. No place to pour the Zyklon B in. Therefore, the story is wrong. Therefore, no one was gassed at Auschwitz. Therefore, no one was gassed anywhere. Therefore, the Holocaust didn't happen. You see that sort of line of reasoning from one little tiny thing. First of all, actually, there is a hole there. And actually, we have a picture of it. Again, it's just rubble. I mean, where's there going to be a hole in this? Well, this isn't anyway. This is the undressing room here. And a lot of this is reconstructed already. Since the Polish government took it over from the Russian, whoever was running it, they've been reconstructing it. But here's a hole. This is actually in the Crematoria 2 gas chamber roof. Stood right on it. There's a hole. So, of course, we have this picture in the book. I had the picture with me when I was at the Deniers conference, and they're wearing their little T-shirts, "No holes, no Holocaust." I said, well, what about that? That looks like a hole to me. They said, oh, okay, all right. No holes in the right place, no Holocaust. Oh, okay, all right, right. No holes in the right place. And what is the right place for the hole? Okay. Well, actually, we have some feel for that from the aerial photographs. Here's the little railroad tracks that the 5 retort crematoria are right there, the tracks where they took the bodies right up to it. The big denier on the aerial photographs in Auschwitz is a guy named John Ball, who says that this Crematoria 2 that we've been talking about, that this little these little marks on the roof, the holes, these were put on by the CIA in the 1970s. They were drawn on the negatives. And So, for example, from his book, he says the fence was drawn in and the little marks on this is crematory 2, crematory 3. These were drawn on. They actually took like a little scratch thing and scratched in the negative and so on. Because I said, well, you know, it'd be pretty obvious, you know. Oh, well, what they did was they took the negative. This is the CIA. They can do this. And they made a big, huge blow-up, you know, wall-sized thing, and then marked it in, and then shrank it back down so that you wouldn't see that they looked like scratch marks, and then rephotographed it and then pieced it back into the, you know, the conspiracy goes on and on. So Alex and I actually, we've seen the original roll of aerial photograph negatives. You know, they're not clipped and glued back in. The photographs they're not scraped or scratched or marked in any way. You can tell if something is marked or not. He says, for example, this little line of prisoners here was drawn on. That somebody in the CIA who was sophisticated enough to do all this stuff somehow just took a little pin and went like that, like no one would know, and so on. Anyway, so let's look at the aerial photographs. This is the IG Farben oil synthesizing plant. This is this little subdivision of it. This is Auschwitz I, the original Polish camp, and this is Auschwitz-Birkenau. Crematoria 2 and 3 are right there, and 4 and 5 are there and there. This is the big camp that you see in all the photographs. Here's a blow-up of it. Auschwitz I right here. Auschwitz-Birkenau here. It's a huge place. Crematoria 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 are there. Again, blowing up. Here is Auschwitz-Birkenau, and again, crematoria 2 and 3 right there, 4 and 5 here. You can see the bombs being dropped, but not on Auschwitz. This is from 30,000 feet. The bombs are moving laterally as well as down. They're heading for the IG Farben oil synthesizing plant. So here's the actual blow-up. These now, what Alex and I did, we got the original negs. We had copies of the original negs made, so we actually had negs. Then we took them. I live in Pasadena. I'm right near Caltech and JPL, Jet Propulsion Laboratory of NASA, so I took them over there. I found a guy who specializes in aerial photographs for the government, for NASA. Okay, so this guy's going to know what he's talking about. So we had them analyzed and so on. He could clearly see they weren't marked and so on. You could see the 4 holes in the gas chamber roof there. And to confirm it, here's, again, convergence of evidence. Here is a actual ground photograph made by the SS. Look, you can see the little vents. 1, 2, 3, 4. They're staggered. They're not in a perfect line, just like you saw in the aerial photograph. So again, we're getting confirmation, a convergence, a corroboration of stories. And of course, we're told from eyewitness accounts that that's what they did. They climbed up on top. They poured the Zyklon B into the holes. These are just a few other aerial photographs. Crematoria 5. Here's the aerial photograph of it. Now, it's possible, we're not sure, but Alex and I have sequel shots of this. I think I have them back to back there, that this may be a line of prisoners being marched into Crematoria 5. Here's the 2 smokestacks. The gas chamber is right about there. The undressing room is there, so they take them in like that. But it's difficult to see. It's a pretty fuzzy photograph, so I can't say that for sure. But the dates match. They're correct for a shipment brought in that day. Anyway, and then of course we also have ground photographs taken secretly of them actually burning bodies because the crematoria were not designed to be operated as much as they were, so they broke down. So they had to do open pit burials. We have eyewitness accounts of this. We have accounts by the Nazi doctors, the commandant, the guards, and so on. And we also have a photograph that confirms it. There they are. They're doing it. How can you deny it? And then also this other famous photograph marching a group of women off to Crematoria 5. So that's it on the second point, how we know that the camps did what we've been told that they do. And finally, then wrapping it up, the third point: how do we know the Nazis intended to do this? We know, again, from a convergence of evidence. It's true. There's no signed letter from Hitler saying, "I hereby order the extermination of every last Jew in all of Europe." Signed Adolf Hitler. But we also know that early on, about 1939, he realized that putting those kinds of things in writing could get him in trouble. So this became part of the sort of table talk, the giving the orders implicitly, like we imagine the mafia works. You know, hey Vito, take care of this problem for me. Vito knows what the boss means when he says take care of the problem, and we know that Hitler's underlings operated this way. They know, you know, we have to solve this Jewish problem. Well, what are we going to, well, you know what the boss means, all right? And so it operated that way. But even that, we can do better than that. We have lots of documents and accounts in which they talk about the Ausrotten, the Juden, the extermination of the Jews. And we reproduce several of these in the book, the Ausrotten the Juden. So David Irving says, oh, but Ausrotten really doesn't mean exterminate, even though today, if you look in a German dictionary, if you look up exterminator, the guys that come to your house and exterminate pests, they're called, it's Ausrotten. That's what they do. Well, different words mean different things in different times. Back in the 40s, Ausrotten just means to get rid of. So we went to a historical dictionary. No, it means exterminate. Well, maybe the translation, we lost in the translation. They really just meant to get rid of the Jews. So we reproduce documents here about the Ausrotten the tuberculosis and the Ausrotten the lice. Well, what did they mean? We're going to take the lice and put them on trains and deport them to a camp somewhere off to Madagascar, maybe? No. Ausrotten means extermination, to kill. To which Irving says, oh, yeah, different context, different usage. For lice, extermination. For people, just get rid of, just deport. So then we found a document of a German general ordering the Ausrotten of the American troops at Bastogne, division by division. Well, what did he mean? I said to Mr. Irving. Put the American troops on trains and send them back to England so they can fight again? Or did he actually mean to kill the American troops at Bastogne? Of course, a little sarcasm there. We know what that means, all right? So again, you piece it together with different documents, different usages, and it becomes clear. They really intended to actually kill these prisoners, not deport them, not send them off to a Club Med somewhere, but to actually exterminate them. And finally, then, in closing, that's how we know anything in the past happened. If we treat history as a science like it should be, then we won't end up with, or at least we can properly combat, phenomenon like Holocaust denial. Thank you. Although it's not always that apparent, we actually did a content analysis of every one of their issues of the Journal of Historical Review all the way back to Volume 1, Number 1. I looked at every article, every letter, every book review, and so on, expecting that the number one category of subject would be Judaism and Jews and what Jews are doing and so on. And it's not. Actually, the number one subject in all of their journals is themselves. They write about revisionism and free speech and how everybody's against them and how they're being squelched unfairly and free speech, and that's their number one subject, themselves. So they're really quite obsessed with themselves. And then the agenda starts coming through of what the Jews are doing. They make a couple just classic errors in thinking of overgeneralization. They say the Jews as if there's one coherent body that like one person could speak for, which is, is obviously not the case for any people, but certainly and especially Jews, there's quite a diversity of opinions on any number of subjects, and to say, well, all Jews think this is utterly ridiculous. But then they also make the mistake of confusing a culture and a history with a race. For them, it's a race. It's a genetic, biological thing in addition to culture. It's not just a type of a cultural thing. There's more there. Then they start talking about, and here's how it works in conspiracy. We study conspiracy theories all the time in Skeptic. Here's how it works. Once you have the model set up, then you go in search of data to fit it. It's called a confirmation bias in psychology. And we all do it, but you have to be careful not to do it, and in science there's built-in mechanisms to prevent that from happening. But in conspiracy thinking, you just have the model, then you go looking for it. So as soon as you think the Jews are running the media, all you do is just look around and see how many Jews you can find that head studios or broadcast companies or whatever, and they're easy to find. There you go. You just find, okay, you see, there, and there, and so on. And that's what they do. Everybody has to have a hobby and a cause in life. This is theirs. At their conferences, they sort of bond. They really like each other. And to really get a group to bond well, it helps to have an enemy, somebody that's against us, that we don't like. We're against them. They're against us. They really hate us. Look what they're doing. The cabal. And Irving just feeds that. He got 4 standing ovations at his talk. It's so easy to see how quickly it degenerates to these overgeneralizations. At the conference, they had ex-Senator Pete McCloskey from California come speak about the influence of the ADL in American politics. And he was talking about, the ADL does this, the ADL does that. And he clearly stated right at the beginning, look, I'm not sure about any of this Holocaust stuff. I don't know anything about that. I don't know what you guys are on about that. I'm just here to talk about the ADL. And that's all he did, is the ADL did this, the ADL did that. One guy sitting next to me is, he's mumbling under his breath, well, those GD Jews, look what those Jews are doing. The Jews quickly from ADL to all Jews do whatever the ADL does. And the psychology of it is quite scary. If you take a man like David Irving, how did he get to be in that position? How do you get from here to there? And there's a complex psychology of this. I mean, he starts off, I've really read his stuff and followed him for a long time. He starts off as a World War II historian, and he gets interested in the German side of things, in part because he's really interested in, he lived in Germany for years and so on, but also in part because no one else was doing it. Everybody's writing the Ally side, authors want to find a niche to sell books, no one else is doing this. Okay, so he's kind of carved a niche for himself as the biographer of all these, the big Nazi heads. And he started with Rommel, was his first book. I read his book when I was in junior high school. It was a great book. Military historians use that book. And so there's not a hint of any of this stuff about Holocaust, revisionism, denial from Irving at all in his early works. And then he starts down the road, he does the Hitler book, and he I think just sort of to stir things up, maybe sell more books, he puts out this $1,000 challenge upon publication of the book that any historian that could produce the Hitler order. And this gets everybody all up in arms, and he gets a lot of attention. And it's like, ooh, I'm getting a lot of attention with this. Now, I'm not saying this is conscious. Maybe it is, but it's hard to infer internal states. But certainly, it would be reinforcing to get attention. All authors would love to be reviewed, love to have attention, sell books, get lectures, and that sort of thing. And I think the more he went down that road, the more attention he got. Now, he's not an academic. He has no PhD, he has no professional standing in any academy or anything like that. And I think that irks him a little bit because he's very smart. He's as smart as any PhD historian out there. He knows the documents and the archives as well as any of these guys, his colleagues that teach at Oxford and Cambridge and so on. And I think it bothers him that he doesn't get the attention. So basically, at some point, he made the decision, I'm going down this road. Screw him. I don't care what the consequences are. And once he did, then he starts getting lots of reinforcement from that side. Now, he'll say, and he has said publicly, I don't care for these people. They're like dirt on my shoes. They're irksome. They're cranks. They're fringe nuts. I know that, but I'm using them. He has said this. And there he was a couple of weeks ago in Newport Beach at this beautiful hotel, and I'm sitting there talking to him, and I quoted the quote from him. Do you really feel this way about these guys? He goes, yeah, sure, of course they're cranks. I said, well, what are you doing here? He says, I like Southern California. It's like, yeah. But in reality, he then goes to give his talk, and he gets 4 standing ovations. They buy his books. They want his autographs. He is the hero. And, all humans respond to that kind of attention. And, of course, so the more he goes down there, the more attention he gets. And that's the psychology of it. And the anti-Semitism is all part of that with that group.
Guys focused on the Holocaust, but has there been any evidence of a similar phenomenon surrounding maybe not necessarily slavery, but other genocidal acts, or is this the Holocaust denial something that's purely a anti-Semitic phenomenon?
This is a great opportunity to suggest that you read the last chapter in the book on Japan.
Yeah, we talk about the rape of Nanking, that book called The Rape of Nanking, it's a fabulous book. It's remarkable the kinds of arguments that Japanese government officials use in their denial of the rape of Nanking and other atrocities during the war. I mean, it's almost like they went to the same school of debate as the Holocaust deniers. Okay, now you do this, then you do this, and you say that, and so on. It's like boom, 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 step by step. It was, I was startled when I was reading that book. Oh, we got to include this. It's too good. But as for the other stuff, well, there actually is in the same sort of right-wing, extreme right-wing leanings, particularly people that live in Idaho and belong to a lot of these militias. They really feel that African Americans have highly exaggerated the mistreatment of them. Slavery wasn't really that bad, and this whole affirmative action thing, it's like aid to Israel, the Holocaust is affirmative action. Well, the blacks and the liberals and the Jews and the communists and the socialists in America are doing this whole thing, and so we have to stand together, white power, I mean, there's the extremists, but then there's the more moderate ones that they don't shave their heads and they don't, carry guns in in the back of their window of their truck, but they believe a lot of that. They believe that, a lot of this stuff has been exaggerated for economic gain and moral control and power over others. So yeah, it happens.
I'm a survivor of the Holocaust that chose many years ago to share my personal experiences during that horrible time. But what happened to me, it's very important to know. They are planting people at presentations. They ask you a question, and they try to catch you by a lie. Myself, I think I mentioned it to you before, at a presentation in Illinois in a university, a gentleman with a book with a brown cover comes over, and then he says to me, now what do you think about that in this book? It says that the Russians, the Soviets, raped more women than the Germans did, than the Nazis. And I said, oh yes, that may be, because it was Russian Schande. You're not allowed to sleep with Jewish women. And the next thing, he says to me, what do you think about you were in Stutthof? What do you think about the soap that they say that they made in Stutthof? And I'm very careful, because I have to be careful. I said, well, I don't know about it, but if they would have, how would I feel?
Yeah, I think the advice then is to exactly what you're already doing, which is to just tell exactly what you know without embellishment and so on. What they are looking for there is the fact that human memory is flawed. We all confabulate and conflate different memories and confuse events and when they happened, and they'll have some account in which Mengele was at this camp at this particular date, and the survivor will say, I saw Joseph Mengele myself when I was there, which is at a different date, and they'll say, aha, you see, either they're lying, or they're exaggerating, or their eyewitness accounts are entirely unreliable. It's true, eyewitness accounts have to be used judiciously when you can corroborate with other accounts and you look at all the evidence and so on. And again, that's part of their strategy of that minutia thing. Let's find some little thing we can trip them up on, and then the whole edifice will come crashing down. And that's the problem there.
Excuse me, you know, I was in Stutthof 2 years ago.
I think
Just one little remark.
don't forget we're on television. So
No, that's okay.
All right.
That's okay. And there is in Stutthof, in the museum, a formula, and it's written up in many books. Now, how could they have a formula to make soap without doing experimentation or something?
We addressed that in the book, Alex.
Yeah. First of all, let me just say the same thing Michael did in a little different way with survivors. It's extremely important that when you speak in a situation, whether it's a classroom or publicly in any way, that you make it clear that you're not historians. You're there to speak about your experience and your experience alone, and that when there are questions that are beyond your level of expertise, you tell them that. That's extremely important. We've had a lot of problems with people who, when they get up in front of a crowd, wanted to start explaining things about which they're not prepared. Now, with regard to Stutthof, we spent a lot of time dealing with this issue of the soap, and we came to the conclusion that it's true. There was some renegade group within that camp that was responsible for making soap from human flesh, from human fat. And that's why you have those ingredients. But we found that there's no indication whatsoever that these were Jewish bodies. They were probably Russian prisoners of war.